biggest problems? Let's focus on healthcare for a moment. What are the biggest problems causing the healthcare worker shortage? What is it?
Uh, there's a lot going come to mind. I'd say probably the biggest ones are like burnout, feeling burnout, and being overworked. There's this huge industry-wide limitation around resources. So many employers don't have the tools or the resources that they need in order to provide their employees with the things to create great quality of care. There's a lot of turnover and employee ghosting. So you've got individuals who might have worked at a location for a certain number of years and then just one day just doesn't show up to their shift anymore because they're done. They've had it. They don't want any more stress in their life.
You are listening to Personalization Outbreak, a podcast about the collapse of traditional corporate standards in today's more personalized world. I'm Glenn Llopis. I'm a leadership strategist, author, contributor to Forbes, and founder of the Leadership in the Age of Personalization movement. On this show, I'm interviewing executives across multiple sectors to find out how the balance between standardization and personalization can exist. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Personalization Outbreak Podcast. Now, did you know that 57% of employees globally are not completely satisfied with their job? In fact, how about this one? 59% of employees are feeling stressed most of the time. I'm sure we could all kind of connect and resonate with that one. See, this data was reported in Indeed's Global Work Wellbeing Survey, analyzed by the University of Oxford Wellbeing Research Center. So that you know the power of the Indeed brand, here's a fun fact. Indeed actually has the largest well-being data set in the world. Here's another interesting finding from the Wellbeing Survey. Contrary to common assumptions, factors such as compensation and flexibility rank lower in their influence on work well-being. Instead, it's the social elements, particularly belonging and inclusion, that are the most influential factors. Now, in reading these studies, they really grabbed my attention. See, I've trained thousands of employees and leaders on how to lead in the age of personalization. And I've often wondered why 50% of the people that actually go through our program get highly emotional. Well, I've learned why. It's because they've been suppressed throughout their entire careers. See, they've been forced to navigate work environments that don't make them feel as if they belong, and nor do they feel included in the work that matters most to them. Now, to help us break all this down and dig deep into the data is our guest today, Kyle M.K. Now, Kyle is not only the best-selling author of the book, The Economics of Emotion, he's the Work Wellbeing Advisor at Indeed, where he works with top brands to improve employee experience from start to finish. His focus is on removing obstacles that get in the way of people doing their best work, creating workplaces where employees thrive and businesses succeed. Kyle, welcome to the show. I've been excited about speaking with you. Appreciate your time today.
Glenn, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, of course, of course. And I think that our audience is going to enjoy getting to know you in just this wealth of knowledge that you have around work well-being. Now, to get started, if it's okay with you, I'd like to ask you for you to respond to a few data points from my organization's recent personalization in the workplace study. You ready?
Yeah, let's have it.
Okay, let's do it. 80% of managers strongly agree that working and learning environments work against individuality. In fact, 76% of those managers strongly agree that they're actually being forced to comply with how their company wants them to behave and work. How do you respond to that one?
It's an interesting stat because the way that it's phrased, it definitely does take, when you think about how employers try to share knowledge with any of their employees, they are given some pretty strict rules. You got to use this tool. This is the way that we are going to teach you. It doesn't necessarily speak to how everybody learns. Some learn more with a personal touch, where they can learn from an instructor rather than from a an online module, so they can ask questions live. Others learn more from like auditory, like through a podcast. So yeah, it is interesting for an employer to say, here's one way that we need you to learn this one thing in the way that we expect you to do this thing. And it does take some of the personalization out of it, doesn't it?
Well, doesn't it take some of the well-being out of it as well?
Yeah, I mean, if you're forcing someone to do something that goes not necessarily against the way that they learn, but in a way that doesn't necessarily allow them to absorb that information in a quick and efficient way, then sure, I can imagine how stressed someone could become if they don't have the the information that they need in the time that they need it in the way that they need it.
Here's the last one. 89% of managers strongly agree their mindsets at work were not shaped nor rewarded to be agile, resilient, and authentic. That 71% of those managers strongly agree their work environment causes unnecessary stress due to conflicting behavioral expectations. What do you think about this one?
This is great because this is more of a macro look at something that I think everybody has experience with a manager at some point in their career. Because typically, what happens when we get a manager is or when we hire a manager, we look for an operationally gifted individual and we put them in charge of other operationally gifted individuals. When really what that team needs is a people leader, someone to motivate them. I like to say it's like the Ted Lasso of the group, right? Where this is someone who may not know the sport very well, and that's okay because they're really there to make sure that you're motivated, inspired, you know exactly what your team is or your goal is from a team perspective. And so if you just extrapolate that to a much larger organization, that's what the company is doing in this and or what these managers are saying that the company is doing for them is saying, oh, there's only one way for you to do this, or we need you to do things exactly how we expect you to do it, not necessarily allowing these gifted individuals to grow on their own or learn things on their own. And so it's kind of like a gardener forcing a tomato plant to go exactly how they want them to grow, not letting the tomato plant grow the way that it naturally grows.
Well, you've just given us a good tip to go back and watch Ted Lasso because he's the master of personalization and giving people the freedom to be all that they can be without a lot of restrictions, except you got to be a good team player. But anyway, love your responses and insights. So let's go to the questions that we've really discussed and prepared for because these are big issues. But they're also, I like to view them as opportunities, right? Because this is an opportunity for organizations to start approaching their employees a lot differently than in the past so that we avoid those numbers that I just read to you.
Yeah.
So the first question is this: what are the biggest problems? Let's focus on healthcare for a moment. What are the biggest problems causing the healthcare worker shortage? What is it?
Uh, there's a lot going come to mind. I'd say probably the biggest ones are like burnout, feeling burnout, and being overworked. There's this huge industry-wide limitation around resources. So many employers don't have the tools or the resources that they need in order to provide their employees with the things to create great quality of care. There's a lot of turnover and employee ghosting. So you've got individuals who might have worked at a location for a certain number of years and then just one day just doesn't show up to their shift anymore because they're done. They've had it. They don't want any more stress in their life, and so they've decided to just cut off ties entirely. And then I think one of the biggest things that's driving a lot of this is the lack of competitive salaries and or benefits. There's a lot of people out there who are struggling to make ends meet while they're also trying to take care of their communities from a healthcare perspective. And that's a big driver of the stress and the burnout that comes into play is that because people aren't able to take care of their foundational needs, they're of course leaving their employer or in some cases the industry in general. And then those that are left over still have that work to do, but then they have the same limited amount of resources to do this more like this bigger amount of work. And It's this cycle of a lot more demand and a lot less resources.
I see what you're talking about specifically with nurses. I mean, they're constantly over delivering. I've never seen a role where it has such a disconnection with senior leadership. In other words, senior leadership, and not for all healthcare providers, but many, they have these expectations on what they want to see from nursing. And it's always based on the metric without having a real understanding of what it is that they do. And here's a fun little fact. I've learned that most nursing supervisors have direct or indirect influence with 38 different functions and or departments.
Wow.
I mean, they run the show. So to think that they're the ones, for the most part, who are not just experiencing burnout, but are quick to say, I'm out of here. This is it's a very concerning environment that they're working in. And I know a big push for them are healthy work environments, but it kind of puts a strain on not just their productivity, but the overall quality of care that they may deliver to their patients. So anyway, with shortages in healthcare, do you think that this is more of a clinical issue or a non-clinical issue, or is it a combination of both?
I think it's a combination of both. Yeah, this is an industry-wide situation. I've had the pleasure of being able to speak to lots of employers, both gigantic and very tiny in the healthcare space, and everyone is saying the exact same thing. It's impossible to find talent, it's impossible to retain talent, and it's impossible to get more resources. And when those three things are all impossible, you start to think, well, what is the future of the industry? Luckily, though, there's a lot of things that are like the tide is turning a little bit. I think employers are starting to realize that the healthcare or the well-being and health of their own employees is maybe more important than what they provide to their community. Because if you don't have a really great community of healthcare workers ready and willing to provide the best care that they can to their clients or sorry, to their patients, then their patients, of course, are not going to be able to get the best care that they need. So as employers start to, as more and more start to see the importance of that work well-being and the mental health and having psychological safety, I think we're going to see a pretty significant change in the amount of people who not just want to work in the industry, but those that are staying.
Well, as I hear you, you've just validated why we need to stop looking at our employees in healthcare as cost centers. I
Yeah.
mean, they're consumers. And as much as they pay attention and put a lot of emphasis on delivering value-based care for the patient, I think your message is pretty clear. We need to start delivering value-based care to our employees too, because they both have um, a symbiotic relationship in delivering, high quality care because they both have to be ready to deliver it both to the patient and to themselves and those around them. Which leads me to this next question. How can healthcare organizations actually reduce turnover? How can they increase retention, in other words?
Um, so there's a lot of uh, different types of things that they can do. Some are small, some are, of course, much larger. So the biggest thing that they can do to reduce turnover is probably by just supporting workers better, asking them what they need in order to do their best work. Seems super simple, but it can be super complicated to try to understand at large exactly what you need to do as an organization to provide the best care to your employees. So doing an intentional listening campaign would be a really good idea. If you want to have surveys that you throw out or one-on-one conversations like stay interviews, that'd be good. But just having a some sort of way for these employees to air their grievances, share what they think that they need in order to do their best work.
You mentioned stay interviews. Can you go a little bit deeper on that?
Oh yeah, I love these things. So these are they've gained a lot more popularity since COVID. Everyone's familiar, I think, with exit interviews, right? But at
Mhm.
that point, when we're asking folks, "Hey, why did you decide to leave us?" We've already lost them. Um,
Right.
it'll cost that employer maybe 9 months worth of that person's salary to replace them. So like we're trying to plug the hole when the water's already escaped.
Hmm.
And the stay interview is really a great intentional conversation that you have with an individual, asking them what they need in order to stay at the company. So this is before they even decide to leave. And what's really important when people who are conducting stay interviews do these things is that it's not someone's manager or direct, they're not interviewing a direct report. It can't be anybody within that chain of command that's actually asking these questions. It has to be someone that is either a peer or a third party like
Mm.
HR, because when someone feels like they're in a safe environment that they can truly offload any sort of um, uh, negative feelings or animosity they have towards their leadership or towards their company, then that's when we start to really uncover the true gems of what the company can do to provide a better experience. So yeah, big fan of stay interviews. Recommend that every company does it as often as they can.
I agree with you. In fact, see if you got a reaction to this one. You could always pass. It's all good. You just prompted the thought. I did some work with a notable healthcare organization, and it was with their nursing leaders. And when we were done, they said, "What is your number one recommendation?" Because what was happening is that the senior executives just didn't, there was a disconnection in understanding of who the actual nursing supervisors were, not just what they do, but who they are as individuals. And when it was done, I said, I'm recommending that you create the space for these nursing supervisors to reintroduce themselves to the executive team. Here's what I was told. Glenn, they're never going to buy on it. They're never going to do that. They won't buy off on that. I go, buy off on what? The reintroduction. Why? Oh, we just don't do things like that. And I thought to myself, oh
Hmm.
my goodness, what a missed opportunity. I
Yeah.
mean, this is what they need, not want, need, which means what? I want to have an opportunity to do a reintroduction so I can earn the respect that I need. Anyway, any thoughts or comments, or we can move on?
No, it makes me wonder, well, when you say we don't do things like that, what are we truly saying? What do you mean like that? Like we don't do things like give our employees time with leadership. We don't give our employees an opportunity to share their grievances. Like what is the that we're actually saying? And if as leadership, if we're not taking time to meet with our employees on a regular basis or doing like multi skip levels, those types of things, then I don't know. It makes me wonder, well, what are you doing then? Because that is the workforce. That's who's providing the value for the company that you lead. And if you're not interested in what they have to say, then it'll be very difficult for you to attract folks, because I don't know many people who want to work for someone who doesn't want to listen to them. So that's concerning to me, but not necessarily surprising. I can't say I haven't heard that in the past, but there's a lot of I think companies that are cluing into the future of work, which is going to be work well-being, a more human-centric approach. And so those employers that do that, they're going to be in a really great position in a couple of years, whereas these companies who don't have time for that are going to be in a very difficult position in the next couple of years.
Well, and what you're saying, and what I'm getting out of it, I should say, is that they didn't understand the importance of work well-being. I mean, what a simple thing to do. And yet it was almost as a threat rather than seen as an opportunity, which is exactly what it was. So,
Interesting.
on this note, Kyle, why do you think that work well-being is actually getting worse? Because I agree with you.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I think it's this cycle, this horrible cycle that we're in. So there is it does start off with a high stress environment, which I think healthcare in general, especially those in hospital systems, like that is pretty difficult to work in for long periods of time without a break. And COVID accelerated a lot of the issues that the healthcare industry were already experiencing, but this just kind of accentuated those. And what's really interesting in our well-being data, we've been keeping track of how people feel about their employers for the last 5 years, since October of 2019. And you can see like the graph of well-being has been steadily declining since then. However, in April of 2020, that was the highest peak of well-being. April. So this is a month after the lockdown. And if we start thinking about, well, why were people happiest a month after this lockdown? And you start to look at, well, all the news reports that we were reading around those times, the things that employers were doing to keep people engaged, like that is the standard of well-being. We were clapping out nurses at the end of their shifts. We were honking at drivers on the road, thanking them for being those frontline workers, as essential workers. We were giving people the flexibility to go to doctor's offices or hang out with their kids because their kids were home from school. Like we were doing all these things to allow people to do their best work in the environment that they were in. But then May 2020 comes along and we're like, we don't really care about that anymore. We're not going to clap you out. We're not going to show appreciation. And I think healthcare workers, especially, kept having to do all of that difficult work, but with a lot less pats on the back or a lot less visibility to their leadership. And so that is a big piece of why I think it's been declining is that employers have become complicit with the amount of talent that's coming through their doors, that they just don't necessarily see the value in providing those individuals with a really great work experience because they know how much work needs to be done. And so if they take any time out of their day to provide their employees with something great, then they might feel like they're taking away from the patient experience or from the business themselves. But I think what they don't understand is like that is the oil in the machine that they're trying to run, and they're running out of oil. And they really need like new people in there, like folks that are really passionate about the work that they do. So a long-winded answer, but I think that's a big piece of that. There's also not enough inclusion or belonging in the workplace. I don't think folks are being asked about what they need in order to do their best work. So employers aren't able to give them those things because they just aren't aware of it.
That was fantastic. And I'll tell you what I took away from it is that when they need you, they'll do good. When they don't need you or don't think that you deserve it, they won't.
Oh,
And this is a classical, what I call standardization maneuver. They create the illusion that you matter. And then when they don't think you matter because they think that they have control again, it goes back to the ways that we always do things. I don't know about you, but I'm sick and tired, Kyle, of people saying, "Oh, we got to learn how to think differently. We got to, no, that's just not the way that's not the way we always done things." I mean, this type of mindset, this is what skews all this work that's so important. So, on that note, I have a question here for you, Kyle. Can you give us your definition of work well-being? And the reason I kind of want to go back to to a foundational level, I think sometimes we don't really know what these terms mean. How would you suggest people see what and understand what work well-being is all about?
yeah. So the way that we define work well-being is simply how someone feels about their work and their work environment. Um, the way that we calculate that or we quantify that is we've got four indicators: happiness, purpose, satisfaction, and your level of stress. And if we only ask employees those four questions, are you happy? Are you satisfied? Do you have a sense of purpose? And what is your stress level? That gives us a pretty great indication of how people feel about work. Doesn't necessarily tell us how to solve those problems. We have 11 other well-being drivers like manager support and compensation and flexibility and appreciation and learning and so on to tell us how to improve those indicators. But those four indicators are the thing that we look to define whether or not an employee feels good or bad about where they work. A lot of employers that I've talked to, they try to measure well-being at work, but I don't know, I don't think they understand it fully just yet because they'll say like, oh, we're thinking about mental health, physical health, financial health, and social health. And that's how we define well-being. But of those four things I just named, three of them are technically drivers of the one indicator, and that is that mental health. So mental health is the thing that we're actually trying to achieve, whereas the physical, financial, and social health are the things that actually promote your mental health, and it creates a much better work environment for you, inside and outside of work. Like you feel better when you go home. You feel like you're satisfied with the work that you've done. You feel
Mhm.
more purposeful because you had a great relationship with the patient, whatever it may be. But yeah, that's how we look at well-being is like how do people feel from the beginning of their relationship with the employer to the end.
Question. again, we could pass on this one, but you're prompting a lot of thoughts here.
I love
And
this.
I'm sure that our listeners, I wish we were like with a live audience now, because we'd have a chat room that was full. But here's, I think, a question a lot of people want to know, just plus or minus. What percentage of the people that you work with do you truly believe they know how to solve for this? Because there's a lot of people that could talk about the what all day long or the why all day long. But how many actually know how to solve it? And do they have a toolkit of hows to address these issues?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the employers that I've spoken to, and we're talking like hundreds of employers over the last few years,
Yeah.
many of them don't know how to solve these problems.
Is
And
that less than 50%, 30%? What do you think? What's your
oh,
gut tell you?
for sure, less than 50% of folks know how to solve these problems. Yeah, at least like this is anecdotal. It's
Yeah, of
not
course, of course, of
for
course. I'm
everybody.
just, no, 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 understood. I'm not holding you accountable to this. It's just, why am I asking? Is that, and forgive me for interrupting, Kyle, is that the work that I do gives me the opportunity to really know employees, whether at the senior level or at the individual contributor level. And I share this because they themselves don't believe, even though the organization creates the illusion of a how, they don't think that there's a how. Why? Because they say to me, Glenn, I'm not actually rewarded for any how. I'm rewarded to practice these concepts that I see them one way, my employee sees them another, but I don't have a playbook for this. That's why I'm asking.
No, yeah, and I appreciate the question because it's true that we have this issue with well-being, and this is in every industry. It's just so prominent in healthcare. But to no fault of the employers, like they truly do not have the resources or the tools that they need in order to solve these problems. They just don't know where to begin. And I think this is what caused Indeed to be so like to go so deep into the well-being well, if you will, to really understand, well, what is it that makes a great place to work, and how can employers create a better environment for their employees? So we actually created our own playbook that folks can use using like real case studies and real examples from other employers to help them become more inclusive or have a culture of belonging or maybe show more appreciation, whatever folks are trying to solve. But I think if there's one thing that people can do, that employers can do to really improve well-being, and this is maybe not an overnight thing, but definitely within a month, is teach their leaders, like every single people leader in their organization, from the CEO down to the very first line of managers, walk them through a very intentional emotional like intelligence training. Soft skills is like the biggest deficit in every industry, is people leaders not knowing how to lead people, not knowing how to give feedback, not knowing how to inspire or motivate. They're so focused on the operations side that they forget that there's a human being behind this work. And I think that's going to be probably one of the biggest shifts that we see in this industry in the next couple of years, is a taking away from the hard numbers and looking more for the soft skills in our talent, because that's going to be the thing that is really going to set us aside, especially with AI. AI is going to be doing a lot of the admin work, maybe even some of the diagnostics and stuff. Like we need that bedside manner more than ever, and we need training in order to do that.
You know, you've just validated something that um, I continue to see, that it's no longer about the institution defining the individual. It's about the individual defining the process towards a shared mission.
Yeah, I love that.
And why is that happening? Because there's only so many things that you can get an individual to do nowadays until they just shut off.
Yeah.
And if you take somebody there, I mean, I'll give you a little, I have no, I mean, this is all very, I'm not sharing anybody's name. I'm not going to share anybody's organization, but I literally had a leader tell me in working with their healthcare organization, Glenn, here are the words that you can use when you work with them, and here's the words that you can't use.
Interesting.
And I said, I can't do that. They go, well, why not? That's how they respond. And my question was, do you know who they are? And this person said yes. And this person shared those people's titles. I go, you've told me what they have.
Know what they
You
do.
didn't tell me who they are.
Yeah.
I go, what do you know about them? And I said, this is my point. Is it because you don't know them, you've given me language to control them, not influence and help them grow. And I think this goes back to your point around soft skills. Am I getting it?
Yeah, it's a super important distinction. Super important.
Super important distinction. So this takes me to the question of how do you think companies can improve employees' sense of belonging? And before you start, can you please give us a starting point for how we can need to interpret or define the word belonging?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different interpretations of the word belonging. My interpretation is that it's a place where you feel connected to the mission of the business, you feel connected to the community of workers that you work with, and then obviously to the goals. Like you can be your authentic self, and all of those things can be true. So that's my definition of belonging.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Go ahead. How can companies improve their employees' sense of belonging based on how you've defined it?
Uh, Truly, the way that you create a sense of belonging is that you're just more inclusive of different viewpoints. So having the again those like intentional listening tours, or just involving individuals who are going to be impacted by a decision, involving them in that decision making process, asking them questions before you change how they do their work or before you tell them what to do. Like very similar to a democracy, and asking folks, hey, we're thinking of it. This is the problem that we've identified. That we're thinking about solving it this way, but we want to get your feedback before we actually implement anything. That, as simple as that is a really great step towards creating a more inclusive work environment, because you're going to get a bunch of different, diverse thoughts, beliefs, and understandings of an issue thrown right back at you and saying, "Oh, I actually see it as this issue," or "Oh, I think it's much deeper than this." It's not an issue of managers. It's not a specific manager who's bad. It's actually all managers don't have soft skills training, as an example. So I think that's one thing. It just helps employees feel a little bit more seen and more supported, and then focus on kind of those social needs. So are we creating an environment where people can connect with their coworkers? Meaning, are we giving them quality breaks? Are we allowing them to have real conversations with their managers? Are their managers constantly checking in on them and saying, "Do you have what you need?" I know, at least from my own personal experience with friends and family that work in hospitals and in other like private practices, they don't get a lot of that at the moment. And so this is something that it shouldn't take too much work to implement, but once it does, it's going to be kind of like a rocket ship, allowing folks to see like, oh, I work as part of a community, trying to serve a community, which I think is really what people are looking for.
You triggered another thought here, Kyle, and I love what you're talking about. You know what I've learned? I've learned that it's hard for people to embrace their differences because, especially leaders or employees that have been taught how to lead or work in a certain way for so long, because they're used to listening to sameness.
Mm.
Now, when you're asking somebody to listen to difference, they don't know what to do with it because the difference actually is interpreted as a threat rather than an opportunity. And I share this because when I've interviewed employees that have unfortunately followed into that trap where they say, "Oh no, just be open," and all of a sudden the person interprets it as a threat and kind of fires back. They say it's just not worth it anymore
Hmm.
because they're not ready to listen to what I really have to say because it's a contrary point of view. And what I've learned is that who do you let in at work? Do we let in people who think like us, or do we really let in those who have contrary voices? And so I share this because I think part of accepting difference is accepting the fact that someone doesn't agree with you and see something very different than you. But what do you do when you encounter that? That's what you got me to think about, Kyle.
That's a really great thought. Two things come to mind for me while you're talking is one, I think businesses, especially like leadership teams within businesses, are having a very difficult time. There's a lot of mental hoops that are being jumped through because they had a way of doing things for such a long period of time. COVID hit and it disrupted every part of our lives, every single part of it. And so now they're trying to take those same traditional operations and apply it to a completely different world. And they're getting frustrated that it's not working. And obviously, of course, it's not working. We don't live in the same reality as we did before when all of those same processes and programs worked. So that's one thing. I think there's a lot of pressure on leadership to figure out what's wrong. And it's not necessarily what's wrong, it's like what's next. And then how, like, what are you doing to do like to move towards that? And then the other piece is that also prior to just a couple of years ago, it was very difficult or very complicated to get a lot of voices to speak their truth or speak their mind on a subject and then go through and organize it. But now we live in this crazy, beautiful, and sometimes scary world of artificial intelligence where you can take gigantic amounts of data, like we're talking real feedback from employees, throw it into a machine and ask it for the main points. Like what is everybody saying? That was a human thing before just a couple years ago. Like someone had to go through and look at all of that feedback. Well,
Mhm.
now we can collect large amounts of data and sift through it much quicker and identify patterns and strategies based off of what it spits out. And I think that's something that maybe healthcare workers or leadership aren't really thinking about, well, how can we use this technology for our benefit in this new world that we live in?
Well, if I can simplify this, okay, you know the one thing that people want? It's really simple. Respect. Period. That is like the baseline.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
No,
So not that there aren't other things. There are, but at the end of the day, at this point, because we're starting over again, right? And you start with the environment, the individual, or both. It's both, and the individual just wants some respect. Because without that, it doesn't matter what they say if people don't feel like they're going to respect what they say. The other thing that you said that caught my attention, and I like the way you said it, but here's my shortened version. Standardization does not solve for personalization. In other words, the old outdated ways that we've always done things don't solve for these more human-centric, personalized needs. But personalization actually does solve for standardization. Why? Because it actually considers the individual in modernizing old, outdated, standardized ways of conducting business. So, my whole point here is until we have well being, our businesses cannot efficiently grow. Which
yeah,
means what? It means that it's going to take a lot more effort to grow if we keep trying to fight the inertia of personalization when some would make the argument you can't personalization can't solve standardization because the inertia of standardization. I think that's what we're feeling is that there's, we're trying to find harmony between these things, but they're operating at the extremes and nobody just wants to let go and kind of figure it out. So anyway, that's what I'm getting from what you're saying. So I don't know if you had a thought on that one.
no. I think yeah, it's very much a w- as humans, we're very stubborn, and successful humans are sometimes more stubborn because they don't want to break something that has been working for them for so long, and so that's it's a difficult maze to navigate. And I think what's great and what's hopefully solidifying is that we are all going through this together. Like everyone's experiencing AI together. We all experienced COVID together. And so if we're not relying on one another to share best practices or learn about our thoughts, and I think we are going right back into the old mentality that just doesn't work anymore. It's just not the way that we operate, especially as millennials and Gen Z start to become the majority of the workforce, which will happen before the next presidential election. that is a big, big part of what millennials and Gen Z are looking for is more community-based work, more people-focused type of missions and purpose statements. So these are the things of the future of work that if we're not quick to adopt, then we are going to be quick to leave or quick to fail, maybe.
You're on fire. Let me tell you what my interpretation of that is that first of all, success for someone that uh, learned the old playbook, for them, it's the numbers. And for them, it's pedigree, like the sense of power in the role and the title that they have. And what you're saying is that these younger generations, they don't see success that way. They see it in the form of community, something that is significant, something that has more sustainability to it, where it's about the healthier whole.
Yeah.
You see, the point is that if success in the old standardized way was defined by being selfish in making sure that you did everything to get to where you wanted to go. And I've had many executives tell me, Glenn, I hate my job. I'm just looking for the number. While now you have generations that couldn't care about, when I say number, the dollar amount to leave and retire. While
Mhm.
these younger generations may not necessarily care about that number, they just care about meeting the metrics in a way that matters to them so that they have that sense of purpose and contribution so that they can continue to grow and evolve in their own way and then start navigating their careers not based upon what the employer thinks is in their best interest, but what they think is in their best interest so that they can find continued happiness and purpose. How did I do there?
I think that's great. Yeah, that's this is the product of the environment of having a generation or a couple generations of folks who grew up with the internet as a tool of theirs. So my understanding of community is very different than my father's understanding of community because he just didn't grow up with this globalization of information and communication. And so I want to have a bigger impact on the world than I think he's ever wanted, but it doesn't make me a better person or a worse person or anything like that. It just means that we're operating with two different missions in mind, and that translates right into work and what these generations are looking for and what they need in order to do their best work. And not to like belittle, I think folks who are looking for a certain financial number, like that's
No,
great.
no, no, no. It's what they want.
But in some cases, like what that really means is they want choice. If they want more money, they really want choice on how to spend that money and what they can do in their lives because of that.
Yeah.
So having that choice is very important, and I think stability is more important for me to be able to do the things that I like, but also have a big impact on the world.
And that's the difference between culture fit and culture add. You're doing great. You're doing great. So us get back to these questions and wrap it up. Can I keep going here? Is that okay?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Go ahead, go ahead.
You're fantastic. So, what tools do you think can actually help healthcare organizations hire faster? Because sometimes these organizations, by the time they're hiring, someone's leaving. So, how can they get out in front of this cycle?
Yeah, this one's a tough one without sounding like an Indeed commercial. But there's a lot of tools out there that Indeed provides. Like there's something called Indeed Hire, or Indeed hiring events that allow these employers who are looking to hire quickly, like high quality talent in a short period of time. This allows them to do that. It uses AI to match you with a bunch of candidates that already have their resume on the platform. And it also gives them a little less control over all of the different steps that they would typically put in. Because sometimes in healthcare, people are going through 5, 6 different interviews over the course of 6 to 8 weeks, and that's just we need people much faster than that. This brings it down to, in some cases we're hiring folks within a week of them using Indeed Hire, and so that's something that I think that more employers could utilize are these tools that are enabled by artificial intelligence to create a much faster candidate experience. So that way, job seekers aren't being ghosted, employers aren't being ghosted, and everybody's getting all the information that they need in order to make an informed decision as quickly as possible.
So you bring up another thought here, Kyle. Is wouldn't and again? I'm just responding to what you're saying here. Couldn't we make the hiring process faster by perhaps making sure that we know what the healthcare employer needs with those soft skills in mind? Because is it about hiring, but also making sure they stay? And the reason I ask you this follow-up question is that we're seeing this in nursing. You're hiring these young nurses, and now they're working with this older generation of nurses that, I mean, my gosh, the foundation that they've created is phenomenal.
Mhm.
But the way they've done the job versus the way these next generation candidates want to do the job, sometimes it's oil and water. So, and I share this because we can sell the vision, we can sell the things that make us feel good in healthcare. But this is about culture, leadership, well being, changing the ways that we fundamentally interact in an environment that's been highly standardized
Mm.
to the point where, as I mentioned earlier, I was told that I had to speak a certain language with their people.
Yeah.
So, is this just a so how can we do this fast hiring maybe a little bit more effectively?
I think you mentioned
Uh-oh. Kyle, we lost you. It's okay. This is what happens with live podcasts. We'll get them back. We'll get them back.
company pages.
Okay, you know what, Kyle, I'm sorry. Can we start over? You froze there. I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
Yeah,
no.
no, it's okay. It's all good. This is the fun part. It's live and we're good. People kind of expect these things, or they think we're scripted. So I'm kind of glad it happened. It's all good. So what is there a better way to conduct or to approach the ability to hire faster?
Yeah, so one of the things that we share or we scream from the rooftops uh,
Hmm.
is to be more transparent and authentic in how you sell the company as well as how you sell the role whenever you're
Hmm.
looking for new talent. Because right now, in a lot of cases, not in every case, because a lot of employers are starting to evolve in how they share their employer brand. Um, but in a lot of cases, employers don't really know what type of culture they have, and they don't know the ins and outs of the role that they're trying to fill. And so what happens is that someone is sold on job A, and then they go through the entire process. And then when they get to the job, they realize, oh, it's actually job B. It's a very
Yeah.
different environment. It's a very different culture. It's a different like day to day than what I was sold on. And so that's the thing that I think employers, if they were to do today, they would see a significant increase of quality of talent and a much shortened period of time in finding that talent because they're more specific about who they're looking for and what that person is going to be involved in once they start. So we're talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly of the work environment to really weed out the folks that aren't going to do well in that type of work and attracting those who are not just willing but also able to do that type of work. But that's scary for a lot of employers to do because they don't want to say, "Oh, you're not going to have any work-life balance." But then what happens? Those people end up not having work-life balance and they end up leaving, and now we're spending a lot more money to try to fill that role again when we could have just said, hey, you're not going to have much work-life balance. And then you attract someone that says, oh, that's okay. I don't really have much going on anyway. You know?
So well put. And that reminds us that what? We love to think that there is one work environment, but depending upon the size of the organization, in this case, healthcare systems or hospitals,
Mhm.
sometimes there's many work environments,
Right.
right? So, I mean, this is not just a one environment. There's multiple environments, but I think it goes back to the opportunity is to, over time, create an environment that is so interconnected without all these silos and all these, all of these kind of perceptions of what those departments do or not do, much like people, right? It's not about, the perception you have of them, but, knowing them well enough to know what you can expect from them and the value that they can bring. So I love the way you did that because what you basically said is if you're transparent and honest about the role, well, then you're going to know whether or not you can find valuable candidates. And the more we have to be less, or not, I say less transparent, but may not be so willing to share so much, then you may see the candidate quality drop. So there's got to be some correlation there. But anyway, the final question I've got for you here, Kyle, is this: what long-term strategies will solve the healthcare staffing crisis? This is a big issue.
I'd say maybe three things total. First one is like improve the work condition of your employees by starting by asking them what they need, right, in order to do their best work. That's the step one. Step two would be to use automated hiring tools. You got to get out of the mindset that a human needs to be involved at every step of the way. There's a lot of automation tools out there, as I mentioned, with Indeed Hire and hiring events. As just an example, to really reduce the amount of time it takes to find these high quality candidates. So just need to be a little bit more data driven and technology driven in that way. And then just create like I think for the last 100 years of commerce and providing services and products, we have been so focused on growth. And we are transitioning now to an age of sustainability. We need to create more sustainable workforce practices that address burnout, that address turnover, that create a more work well-being for each of these individuals. So I think thinking of it from more of a sustainability standpoint rather than from a growth standpoint would be a very big advantage to those who choose to take that advice.
Kyle, just want to give you one before we break here, and I'd love for you to give me your thoughts on what I'm going to share with you. I love what you said. Ask your employees what they need. Little story. I had a leader, this actually recently, said, Glenn, I'm asking my people more and more, what do they need? What do they need? And what I'm realizing is that what they need, I can't give them. In fact, I don't even think the organization can give them what they need. And we're not talking about money, just things that they need to feel as if they belong. Let's just put it in the context of what we're discussing. And I said, try not to think so much about whether you can deliver that. Think more about how you can start listening more to their needs. Because the fact that you're even taking the time to understand what they need is half the battle, because no one really thinks that anybody really cares about what they need. So I don't know if you have a thought or
No,
reflection on that one.
no, I agree. I think just asking the question is doing more than 70% of the employers out there. So just asking is great because once someone knows about what the friction points are, I think every human being has it in us that we want to solve problems, we want to make things easier, we want to help people. And so just knowing what is needed to provide a better work environment, I think will be very inspiring to the leaders to say, oh, yeah, that seems a little bit more reasonable than what I had in my head.
Awesome. Kyle, thanks so much for your extra time. We went well over what we thought, but you've inspired us with some very insightful, not just data, but wisdom on how to approach these topics. And again, I really appreciate your time. And I didn't know if you had a final comment.
No, well, I appreciate you giving us the time. Thank you very much. As this has been a great conversation. It's one that I love having. I think maybe my final thought would be that at least for those employers out there who are struggling, just know that there are a lot of uh, allies that can help them solve those problems that they're running into. Obviously, Indeed and Glassdoor are two big ones where we have more data than anybody can knows what to do with on how to solve the future of work, if you will. But I'd say like the future of work truly is human. And even in with all the like technology and automation, it's still the people who drive the innovation and the creativity and the collaboration. And so as we're becoming more reliant on machines and AI, it's still all in service of like the human connection and the human development, and the soft skills are going to be the thing that remain the most important. So that's why I love HR. They're kind of the community builders of their organization. I love healthcare because they are the heartbeat of their communities. And so keeping people alive and well is going to be a thing that we need going forward. But we can't do that if the heart's not doing well. So and we need people to take care of themselves.
Well put, my friend. Thank you so much for your time today. And as I in every show, when you lead in the age of personalization, you will see things that others don't. Do what others won't and keep pushing when prudence says quit. Kyle, thank you so much again for your time, and let's stay in touch.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thanks for listening to Personalization Outbreak. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. If you enjoyed the content, visit ageofpersonalization.com to check out our free streaming video series and learn how to get involved in the movement. I'm Glenn Llopis. I wish you a good day, and remember, without strategy, change is merely substitution, not evolution.